Please call me James. James, I need you to know something. I've been working as a nurse for 6 years, and I've seen a lot of situations where people in power could have helped but chose not to get involved. What you did today, stopping to help us, using your position to make sure Emma got the best care, that's not something I'll ever forget. Dr. Morrison felt the weight of his responsibility more keenly than ever. Sarah, can I ask you something? How often do you encounter situations like this? People smoking around children, not understanding the risks. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. More often than you might think. A lot of people genuinely don't realize how dangerous secondhand smoke is for babies. They think if they're outside or if they're not blowing it directly at the child, it's okay. That's exactly what I was afraid of, Dr. Morrison murmured. We have a real education problem in this country. Over the next few hours, as Emma continued to recover and show no signs of respiratory distress, Dr. Morrison found himself thinking about the broader implications of what had happened. This wasn't just about one cruel woman and one innocent baby. It was about a system that had failed to adequately educate the public about the real dangers of secondhand smoke exposure. That evening, as Sarah finally brought Emma home, she found something unexpected waiting on her doorstep. It was a beautiful bouquet of flowers with a handwritten note. Dear Sarah and Emma, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for what I did to your precious daughter. There is no excuse for my behavior, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends. I have enclosed a check to cover all of Emma's medical expenses today, and I want you to know that I am seeking help to become a better person. I hope someday you might find it in your heart to forgive me. With deepest regret and sincere apologies, Margaret Thornton. Sarah read the note twice, her emotions swirling between anger and surprise. The check was substantial, far more than the hospital visit had cost. But more than the money, it was the raw honesty in the handwriting that gave her pause. The next morning, Dr. Morrison knocked on Maggie's door. She opened it with red, swollen eyes, clearly having spent the night in tears. Dr. Morrison, May I come in, Mrs. Thornton? I think we need to talk. They sat in the same living room where Dorothy had confronted Maggie the day before, but the atmosphere was different now. The walls seemed less pristine, the perfection less important. I've been thinking about what happened yesterday, Dr. Morrison began, and I realized that while your actions were inexcusable, they've also highlighted a much bigger problem. Maggie looked confused. I don't understand. How much do you actually know about the health effects of secondhand smoke on children? Well, I know it's not good for them, Maggie admitted. But I thought that was more of a long-term thing. Dr. Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Thornton, secondhand smoke exposure can cause immediate and severe health problems in infants. Sudden infant death syndrome, acute respiratory infections, severe asthma attacks, and developmental delays. What you did yesterday could have killed that baby. Maggie's face went pale. Killed her? But it was just smoke. Just smoke that contains over 7,000 chemicals, hundreds of which are toxic and at least 70 that can cause cancer. An infant's lungs are still developing. Their breathing rate is faster than adults, which means they inhale more of these toxins per pound of body weight. Their immune systems can't fight off the infections that secondhand smoke makes more likely. The full horror of what she had done washed over Maggie in waves. Oh my God. She could have. Yes, Dr. Morrison said quietly. She could have died. And you would have been responsible. Maggie buried her face in her hands, sobbing with the weight of this realization. I'm a monster. I'm an absolute monster. No, Dr. Morrison said firmly. You're someone who made a terrible decision based on ignorance and anger. But monsters don't feel remorse like this, and they don't try to make amends. He paused, studying her tear-stained face. Mrs. Thornton, I have a proposition for you. Maggie looked up, hope flickering in her eyes. I'm working on a new public health initiative about secondhand smoke education. I need someone who understands the real consequences of these actions to help spread awareness. Someone who can speak from experience about how easy it is to hurt someone without even realizing it. You want me to help? Maggie asked, incredulous. I want you to take your guilt and your regret and turn it into something that could save other children. I want you to help me make sure no other baby goes through what Emma did yesterday. 3 months later, Maggie stood in front of a community center filled with parents, grandparents, and caregivers. Her hands shook as she approached the microphone, but her voice was steady and clear. My name is Margaret Thornton, and I almost killed a baby. The room fell silent, every eye focused on her. 3 months ago, I was angry at a young mother whose baby was crying during my morning routine. In my arrogance and spite, I deliberately blew cigar smoke into a 6-month-old infant's face. I told myself I was teaching her mother a lesson about respect, but the only lesson learned that day was how quickly ignorance and cruelty can become deadly. She went on to share the medical facts Dr. Morrison had taught her, the statistics about infant mortality related to secondhand smoke exposure, and the heartbreaking reality of what she had almost caused. I can't take back what I did, Maggie concluded, her voice thick with emotion. But I can spend the rest of my life making sure other people understand what I didn't, that there is no such thing as harmless exposure to secondhand smoke for children. Every puff you take near a child is a risk to their life. In the audience, Sarah sat holding Emma, now 9 months old and healthy. She had agreed to attend after Dr. Morrison asked her personally. Watching Maggie speak about the incident with such raw honesty and genuine remorse, Sarah felt something she hadn't expected, forgiveness beginning to bloom in her heart. After the presentation, Sarah approached Maggie with Emma in her arms. Maggie's face crumpled when she saw the baby she had hurt, now growing and thriving. Sarah, Mrs. Thornton, Sarah interrupted gently. I want you to meet Emma properly. Emma, this is Mrs. Thornton. She made a big mistake, but she's working very hard to make sure it never happens to another baby. Maggie looked at the beautiful, healthy child and began to cry again. She's perfect. She's absolutely perfect. She is, Sarah agreed. And she's okay because Dr. Morrison was there, and because you've chosen to learn from what happened instead of just hiding from it. Can you ever forgive me? Maggie whispered. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking at this broken woman who had caused her family such pain but was now dedicating her life to preventing others from experiencing the same trauma. I'm working on it, Sarah said honestly. But seeing you here tonight, seeing how you're trying to turn something terrible into something that helps other families, that means everything. Dr. Morrison joined them, observing the interaction with satisfaction. Mrs. Thornton, I have some news. The education campaign you've been working on has been approved for national implementation. Your story, your willingness to speak about your mistake, has convinced the department that personal testimony is one of our most powerful tools. Maggie looked stunned. National? You mean? I mean that Emma's story, your story, is going to help protect children across the entire country. 6 months later, the Emma's Law campaign had reached millions of families. The legislation that followed required clear warning labels about infant exposure to secondhand smoke and mandated education programs in all pediatric care facilities. The campaign featured Maggie's testimony prominently, along with Dr. Morrison's medical expertise and Sarah's perspective as both a nurse and a mother. Maggie had transformed from the neighborhood tyrant into an advocate for child safety. She had quit smoking entirely, renovated her garden to be more child-friendly, and had become one of the most effective spokespersons for the campaign. Her HOA violation notices had been replaced with educational flyers about child safety and community wellness. The relationship between Maggie and Sarah had slowly evolved from victim and perpetrator to something resembling friendship. It wasn't easy. There were still moments when Sarah looked at Maggie and remembered that terrible morning. But there were also moments when she saw the good person Maggie was becoming, and she felt proud to have played a part in that transformation. On the first anniversary of the incident, the three of them, Dr. Morrison, Sarah, and Maggie, stood together at a press conference announcing the success of the Emma's Law campaign. Infant deaths related to secondhand smoke exposure had dropped by 30% in areas where the education program had been implemented. A year ago, I was a different person, Maggie said to the gathered reporters. I was someone who believed that being right was more important than being kind, that maintaining my version of order was worth hurting others. I was wrong about everything that mattered. She looked directly into the camera, knowing that across the country parents and caregivers were watching. If you take one thing from my story, let it be this. There is no such thing as a small act of kindness, and there is no such thing as a harmless act of cruelty. What we do to each other, especially to children, matters more than we can possibly imagine. Dr. Morrison spoke next, outlining the medical evidence and the ongoing research, but his eyes kept returning to Sarah and Emma, who sat in the front row. Emma was now walking, babbling, and showing no signs of lasting effects from her early trauma. Science gives us the facts, Dr. Morrison concluded. But it's the human stories, the real experiences of families like Sarah and Emma's, that help us understand why those facts matter. And it's the courage of people like Margaret Thornton who chose to face their mistakes and transform them into advocacy, that helps us turn knowledge into action. After the press conference, as the crowds dispersed and the cameras were packed away, the three adults found themselves alone with Emma in the hospital garden where it had all begun to change. I think about that morning a lot, Sarah said quietly, watching Emma chase butterflies between the flowers. So do I, Maggie admitted. Every single day. And I think about all the mornings like it that we've prevented, Dr. Morrison added. All the babies who are safer because you both had the courage to turn trauma into education. Emma toddled back to them, her arms full of dandelions she had picked as gifts. She offered one to each adult with the generous spirit that only small children possess. As Maggie accepted the wilted flower from the baby she had once hurt, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, genuine hope for the future. You know what I realized? Sarah said, watching her daughter distribute her treasures. That morning when you blew smoke at Emma, I hated you. I wanted you to suffer the way she suffered. But watching you change, seeing you dedicate your life to protecting other children, it's taught me something about the power of second chances. I don't deserve a second chance, Maggie replied softly. Maybe not, Sarah agreed. But Emma deserves to live in a world where people can change, where mistakes can become lessons, and where someone who hurts a child can become someone who protects them. Dr. Morrison smiled as he watched Emma toddle away again, fearless and curious about the world around her. You know, in all my years of medicine and public policy, I've learned that the most powerful changes don't happen in boardrooms or legislative chambers. They happen in moments like this, when people choose to be better than they were. As the sun set over the hospital garden, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, 3 adults who had been strangers a year ago stood together, united by their shared commitment to protecting the most vulnerable among them. Emma's laughter echoed through the evening air, a sound of pure joy that reminded them all why their work mattered. Maggie looked at this child who had changed her life by simply existing, by being hurt, and by showing through her resilience that healing was possible. Emma, Maggie whispered, knowing the baby couldn't understand but needing to say the words anyway. I promise you'll never have to be afraid of adults who are supposed to protect you. Not if I have anything to say about it. And in that promise, in that moment of commitment to being better, the true healing began. Not just for Emma, not just for Sarah, but for Maggie herself, and for all the children who would never know how close they came to danger because 3 people chose love over hate, education over ignorance, and hope over despair. The story of Emma and the smoke became more than just a cautionary tale. It became a testament to the power of human transformation, the importance of protecting the innocent, and the truth that it's never too late to choose kindness over cruelty. In communities across the nation, whenever someone lit a cigarette near a child, someone else would remember Emma's story and speak up. And in Willowbrook Gardens, where it all began, children played freely in yards tended by neighbors who had learned that true community isn't built on rules and regulations, but on caring for each other's children as if they were their own. Emma's first word was butterfly, spoken in that same garden where her mother's tears had once fallen like rain. And when she said it, reaching her tiny hands toward the colorful wings dancing in the sunlight, 3 adults who had found redemption in her story smiled through their own tears, knowing that sometimes the most beautiful transformations come from the darkest moments. The smoke had cleared, but the lesson remained. Every child deserves protection, every mistake can become a teaching moment, and every person has the capacity to choose love over hate, no matter how far they may have fallen.